And for instance, when you look at the history of genetics from the middle of the 19th century, for instance, think to the genetics which was still used by Darwin. Darwin, which is one of the founders of the modern science, but the genetics he uses is completely strange, étranger, foreign to our genetics. But after Mendel and De Vries in the beginning of the end of the 19th, the beginning of the you have nearly not only a change in pattern, but a new field of research which appeared, and during those 30 years between Mendel and De Vries, then you have a change which is a dramatic one, and it's not the development of revolution, it's not the development of industry, it's not the imperialism which can be accused or credited for the rise of genetics. It has something to do with this type of historicity, and I have been interested in one book in this kind of change. There's the book about the order of things, in which I try to show how those empiric sciences has developed in the 17th century, with some the 17th and 18th century, with some dramatic changes, and there is no external explanation for it, and or at least I know nobody who could give me any external explanation for it. But it is not at all a principle for me of refusing those kind of explanation. And for instance, excuse me if I speak about myself, but you asked me. in the book about madness, I have tried to show how a certain situation, certain relation to madness, or at least to mad people, have changed from the 16th century to the beginning of the 18th and beginning of the 19th century. Those changes has been determined by some social processes, like the development of an industrial society, the crisis of unemployment, the problem of unemployed people in the 17th century, which were the reason why those great general hospitals has been constructed, and so on. And all that is the social context through which you can understand not why such and such scientific theory has been developed about madness, but why madness became a problem at a certain moment. And I think that's something which it's worthwhile to underline. There is a difference between explaining the change in the scientific model, in a scientific rationality, and so on. And I don't think that the change in the scientific rationality can be explained through social processes. But, on the contrary, I think that the fact that something becomes a scientific problem and emerges as a problem with which a society has to deal, I think that can be explained by social processes. And in the case of madness, I think that we have. Or also why diseases, physical illness has become a real social problem at the end of the 18th century. At that point, that they have been obliged to organize those great hospitals and so on. But the reasons are obviously social, economical, demographical also. The development of urbanism, towns and so on, the epidemics and so on and so on. All that was a reason why diseases, physical illness, became a huge social and political problem. And you can see the effect of the rise of this problem in very important French book about, what's the name, medicine, or this German book in 8 volumes about the health politics of health. Excuse me, I cannot find. Anyway, this book was one of the great signs of the emergence of illness, physical illness, as a social and political problem for all the society. And that you have no reason. But when a few years after, Bichat used a certain type of rationality in order to analyze such and such symptoms. This type of rationality, you can find it through the analysis of social processes.
Okay, fine. Let me now open it up for questions from the floor. What types of issues would people like to pursue, either these or others?
Just to make sure that your answer was understood, you never stopped doing archaeology?
No.
Okay, simple.
No, I never stopped doing archaeology. I never stopped doing genealogy. Genealogy defines the target and the finality of the work, and the archaeology indicates the field with which I deal with in order to make a genealogy. It's something like that.
Now, I have a question. I just wanted to make sure that was clear. Given the kind of explanation, principles of explanation you've just described, could you tell us a little bit about the why history as a profession became important in France at the end of the 19th century?
At the end of the
Well, you said 19th century.
Well, I have a student who is working on this field, and well, I have my idea was that the development of historical studies in France was very important, has been very important at the end of the 17th century, beginning of the 18th century, when the aristocracy and the monarchy came in competition about the foundations of their own rights. Is monarchy only the expression and the expression of an aristocratic social structure, or is monarchy something which has its roots in the nation, in the tiers-état, in the bourgeoisie, and so on? And that has been a very important problem. And you can see at the end of the 17th century, beginning of the 18th century, when the great administrative monarchy of Louis XIV began to decline, then you find a real explosion of those historical researches about, and it is both juridical and historical. And the link between the juridical and the historical researches is very clear. So that was my hypothesis, and I told that to this student. But now she has found something else, which is all those, how do you say, érudite, recherche érudite, scholarly researches done by the monks and the Benedictines in the beginning of the 17th century, which seem to have been the most important roots of, and of course it is in the climate of the Counter-Reform, and it's very interesting to see That's only a schema. It's much too simple. But we could say that for the Reformation, the problem was to get back to the first text, to the text. And, of course, the historical researchers about this text was important for them. But much more than the historical researchers, the problem of hermeneutics. How to interpret this text, since it is the text, and since we have to find for it a meaning nowadays. That's the problem of hermeneutics. The problems for the Counter-Reformation and for the Catholics was quite different. It was to find and justify a historical continuity from the early times of Christianity till now, and to give the foundation, the juridical foundation, the historical justification of this continuity. And so you can see that's a schema, a kind of split between the hermeneutical orientation, which is Reformation, and the historical justification, which is typical of Catholicism. And that could be an hypothesis for this.
Could I throw,
please.
First of all, an observation upon that because it leads to another sort of question, which is Dennis Hay, writing a book called Analysts and Historians, points out that the first person to use the notion of the century as a historical unit is a man called Flacius, who is one of these Counter-Reformation historians, writing, I think, about 1570. Now, in the sense of techniques, that is a typical way in which you could notice a difference between all the kinds of history that are written before, whether they are annals, chronicles, biographies, and the history that is written afterwards, because you now have a new notion, a temporal unit, within which to write your history. Now the question that leads to is indeed the notion of these internal kinds of changes within the discourse of history, they're producing the notion of a unit such as this, and the kinds of changes that you're talking about in the 17th and 18th century. The idea that you can't look outside for external...
You can't
look outside for external social changes. If you look far enough inside the internal discourses, you suddenly find things that strike you as significant, or can strike you as significant. Is that the sort of thing to which you would be looking now in the archaeologists are doing?
Yes, I think if I caught the question, I think